By way of introduction to what I'm going to talk about for a few minutes this morning, the groups that I do here at Wayside, I call event evaluation training. And by that I mean what we do all of our lives is we evaluate events. Events meaning whatever's going on in our lives, whatever it is. It can be important, it can be something that's not very significant, but whatever we're dealing with. It could be something in the past, something that we're dealing with right now, something that we're thinking about in the future, but we have to deal with it. We evaluate it in some way. Now, some of the things that I've already talked about, I'm going to talk about this morning what I call basic assumptions. That is, things that are important going into these groups, what people really need to know and why they need to know them. And the first thing is that past behavior is the best indicator of future behavior. That is, if you want to know pretty much what you're going to be doing for the next year, say from this very day, look back exactly 1 year to last September and see what you've been doing. And what is going to happen is you're going to be doing the same thing over and over. Look back 2 years, see what you've been doing, 2, 5, whatever. And for the next 2 or 5 years, you're going to be doing the same thing. Now that's just simply a fact of social science, but it's an important point to know. Now there's two sides to that. One side is that that's bad news unless you make some kind of effort to change where you are. The good news is that people can and do change. I think every religion in the world is based upon the assumption that people can and do change. But unless something happens with you, unless you determine to change, you're going to be doing the same thing next year that you've been doing in the past year. And if that's the way it is, then that's not going to be good news. What event evaluation training does is to give you some tools to help you make that change. You have to have a track to run on. You have to have some way to understand how to make that change. And the change is a change in the way you think. The second thing I want to talk about is that things cannot be other than they are. If you remember from past times, I've talked about Dr. Albert Ellis, who was the psychologist who came up with, planned the program called Rational Behavior Therapy or Rational Emotive Therapy. And this was one of the things that he based his teachings on. Things cannot be other than they are. That's just a fact of life. That has to do with reality. If we try to make things other than they are, this gets into what is throughout history called madness. Now, we use the word crazy a lot, and we use that in a variety of ways, and it comes out to mean not much of anything or just simply whatever we want to make it. But the word madness actually has a history, a very long and important history. And madness means somebody who is not accepting reality. You're trying to make your own little world to suit yourself. You're trying to create reality, which of course isn't real. And sometimes people create their own little world and actually move into it and stay a while. Some people move back. Some people stay the rest of their lives and never come back. But things cannot be other than they are. So that means simply that we have to accept not only the fact that past behavior is the best determiner of future behavior, but that things are the way they are. We have to deal with reality as it is. The third thing is that emotion cannot be separated from thought or from belief. As I say many times in my groups, emotion is one of those real problem words. It's the word that people have more problem with than any word I can almost think of. I hear the word emotion or emotional used every day in a variety of settings. It's on the news. It's on various programs you watch on television. You will hear somebody say, so-and-so became emotional. or so-and-so was in court and they showed no emotion. Well, emotion is something we don't get rid of. It's part of the way we are. It's part of who we are. It's not that we don't have emotion. It's that we have to think of emotion in terms of the way we think. If you're angry, you had to think something in order to be angry. You just didn't get angry. If you're particularly happy or elated about something, it didn't just happen upon you. You had to think a certain way. You had to create that emotion in order to get angry or happy or whatever. But emotion cannot be separated from belief. Emotion has no existence on its own apart from what we think and the way we think. The next thing is that you cannot change only one aspect of your life. Now, I know people come into the program here, they're in the recovery program. People come in under the idea that they're addicted, and so they may be. But we cannot just change one aspect of our life. In other words, if you're in the program and you're here because of an addiction, you cannot come in and just work on that problem and get unaddicted or cured or healed or whatever you want to call it, and then leave. You have to change your entire life. And one of the verses from the New Testament that I quote very often is Romans chapter 12, verse 2. Be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And what this simply means is this: you have to change completely. I use the illustration very often of a house. You have an old house and you decide you want to do something with it. Are you going to remodel it, spend some money on it, fix the roof, fix this, fix that, and you still have an old house? What the Apostle Paul would say in this verse is you don't remodel your house, you tear it down, you build an entirely new house. So you don't just try to change one aspect of your life, you have to change the entire arrangement. You build a new house. You get rid of the old foggy thoughts, the cobwebs in your mind that got you in trouble in the first place. You get rid of all of that and you replace that with logical, rational kind of thinking. You don't get conformed to this world, but you be transformed by the renewing of your mind, and you don't work on changing your emotion, you work on changing your thinking. Okay, another point is that all problems, one way or another, are related to society. In other words, we're all little bees. We all are part of a hive. We all live in one society. So we don't just change ourselves without that affecting other people. Other people affect us, and that's part of what it means to be able to change and to think more rationally. So self and society go together. We cannot be a good hermit without having been well socialized. So we're a part of society, and we have to realize that we cannot function only as an individual. We're part of society. Another very important part that people tend to forget sometimes is that we are responsible. You are ultimately responsible for your actions, for your choices, for whatever's going on in your life. Now, circumstances happen. Things happen that are unavoidable. We have things that we deal with all the time that we didn't ask for, we wouldn't have asked for. But ultimately, though, whatever I choose, I'm responsible for that choice. Whatever I decide, I'm responsible for that decision. And we have to remember that. We have to be willing to also to scrutinize our thinking, to be willing to discard those things that don't work out for us. Now, part of the problem there is that we have thought about certain things all of our life, and that's perfectly normal. We have been taught this, we've been taught that, and that makes all kind of sense until we get to the point we realize it doesn't make sense anymore. And it's hard to change that. The hardest thing you will ever do in your life is to change. I heard a psychiatrist giving a lecture one time, and he ended up by saying, "I doubt that I have ever truly helped anybody in my life." Now, I'm sure he had, and I'm sure that when people go through this group, a lot of people are helped by it, but sometimes it's hard to see it. I don't see what I do. I plant some seeds, I give some ideas, and I hope that it takes effect and that people work on it on their own. One good example to use about where you are right now is what I call the Exodus model. When God told Moses to deliver the Israelites out of Egypt, you have three things to go on. You have Egypt, you have Sinai wilderness, and you have Canaan. You have the idea of slavery, you have the idea of the wilderness, and then you have the idea of the promised land. And most people that are in my groups are going to find themselves in one or the other. Either you're still back in Egypt, you're still in slavery, you're still a slave to whatever it is that's preventing you from being where you want to be, or you're on your way. You may be in the wilderness. You may be kind of wandering about, but you're making progress. And that's the important thing. As long as you can see that you're making progress, then that's good. Some of you probably haven't reached the promised land yet, or you wouldn't probably be here in this group. But you find yourself in one or the other. And then that leads me into the second aspect of what I want to talk about this morning, and that is what I call barriers to blessing. In the book of Galatians, the Apostle Paul wrote these words when he addressed the Galatian church. You were running so well. What happened? What hindered you? In other words, where did you get off track? Something happened that Paul was addressing, that the Christians in Galatia had got off track. And Paul was saying, what happened? So that's what I'm saying to you. Where did you get off track? How come you're here? How did you get addicted? How come you need to be where you are right now? And I want to say some things about that. One of the reasons that people get off track, and one of the reasons that people do not complete this group, or they don't get what they need out of it, is because they don't recognize the need to change. Some person was brought to Jesus one day to be healed. And Jesus said to him, do you want to be healed? Now, if the man had said no, then there wouldn't have been any point in doing anything. Jesus probably couldn't have healed him anyway. Do you want to be healed? Do you want to change? Do you want to make that change where you're not doing the same thing next year that you were doing the year before or the year after? You have to be able to want to change. That's very important. Another thing is, a lot of people don't get a lot out of this, or at least to begin with, because of what's called very often accepted wisdom. Things that you received wisdom, things that you've been taught all your life. One of my favorite little adages is that it's easier to believe a lie that's told 1,000 times than to believe the truth told once. Well, it takes a while. It takes a while for you to hear, and this is why we do a lot of repetition in this group. This is why you will hear me repeatedly go over Romans 12:2, because you need to hear it over and over. And the more you hear it, the more you're likely to remember it. When advertisers, particularly people who do fundraising, like for some particular cause, they will send out a letter, and you'll get it in the mail, and you've never heard of that. So you think, what's that? And you throw it in the trash can. Sometime later, you'll get another, and you'll think, well, I've got that again. You'll throw it in the trash can. The long and the short of it is this. It's what advertisers call the magic fifth. It's that fifth letter that finally gets your response, because now you're used to it. You've heard it. You finally pick up the brochure and you read it. And you find out, well, there's this hospital down in Memphis that they are doing some good work, and maybe I better send them some money. So once you hear this a few times, it's going to sink in better. And you're going to be more likely to make those changes you need to make. Another is just simply what's called weakness of will. The Greek word akrasia means literally weakness of will. You're just not going to do it. The other word that balances that off is called sophrosine, and that is a word that says self-control. Now, you hear the word self-control a lot, and what does it mean? It simply means thought control. How do you control yourself? You do it only by controlling your thinking, and you control your thinking by having the proper tools and the means of doing that. So that's another reason that people find it hard to accept this group, is because they just simply don't want to do it. Then there is this aspect of being confrontational. Now, what I do in this group is somewhat confrontational. If you go to a doctor and you've had problems, some kind of physical problem, the doctor's not going to say, well, you have this and this, but it's not going to be any big deal. You'll get over it pretty soon. He's going to say, what you have is appendicitis, or what you have is thus and so, and here's what you need to do. And if you don't do it, you're going to be in big trouble. So he has to be somewhat confrontational, but it's done in a way that is in the Bible sense, it's called prophetic. The prophet in the Old Testament is not someone who necessarily predicts the future. That's not what it's all about. It's someone who states the truth. A prophet is one who speaks the truth. That's what it's about. So in this group, that's what I try to do. I try to sum it up for you as best I can, giving you the best background material I can give you to help you see where you are at any particular point, whether you're in Egypt, whether you're in Sinai, wandering about, or whether you're really on your way to recovery. And that's a word that you use a lot around here, is the word recovery. The I don't know and I don't care kind of thing, of course, isn't going to work either. Now, why you're in this group is not important to me. It's what happens once you get here. Some people go into things thinking this is going to be great, and then they find out this is not what I wanted. Or some people will go in by being pushed in. You may be in here because you were told by a judge to get here. But if you listen, you pay attention, and you focus on what you need to focus on, you're going to get as much out of this as if you didn't want to come to start with. So another thing that you need to learn is that what you're going to hear out of me is a different kind of terminology. You're not going to hear a lot of psychological, therapeutic kind of jargon. You're going to hear stuff more like logic, more like rational thinking, and that sort of thing. So these are some of the things that we want to focus on right now. First of all, what are some of the basic assumptions that you need to think about? And we've gone over those. And then what are the things that may stumble you along the way? We've gone over those. So having had that out of the way, next time we'll pick up on a new theme and we'll go into some of the tools. And I'll tell you now what the tools are. The tools that you need are based on language, logic, and what I call some, not just statistics, but some tactics that you need to know that you can work on and will help you day by day. Thank you.